This is Across Divides, a series of stories and experiences from communities across the island of Ireland as they meet shared challenges and consider opportunities for collaboration. Find out more at icommunityhub.org. Hello, I'm Alex McMaster, and in today's episode we're going to be discussing social enterprise, its challenges in both Northern Ireland and the Republic of Ireland, and opportunities for collaboration on an all-island basis. I'm joined online today by four fantastic guests. Chris Gordon is the CEO of the Irish Social Enterprise Network and a managing partner of Collaboration Ireland Social Enterprise and a teaching fellow at Trinity College Dublin. He sits on the National Social Enterprise Policy Implementation Group, which is chaired by our second guest, Andrew Forde. Dr. Andrew Forde is Principal Officer for the Development and Implementation of our Rural Future, Ireland's National Rural Development Policy, as well as the National Social Enterprise Policy for Ireland. He chairs the National Social Enterprise Policy Implementation Group and is the Irish Government's representative on the European Commission Expert Group on the Social Economy. You're very welcome, Andrew. Our third guest this morning is Colin Jess. Colin is Chief Executive of Social Enterprise Northern Ireland, the representative body of social enterprise organisations in the North. He's previously spent over 30 years in banking and is now a council member on the Northern Ireland Chamber of Commerce and the High Street Task Force Forum, as well as the Belfast City Council, Growing the Economy and City Development Board. And our final guest this morning is Adrian Bird. Adrian has worked in the third sector within community regeneration for over 20 years. He was a founding member and currently the director of the Resurgam Trust, a community-based development trust in Lisburn. Then we have a fantastic group of people this morning, and we hope to be joined as well by Amy Clint, who's unfortunately in New York City today. But Amy is the social enterprise, the Youth Social Enterprise Ambassador for Northern Ireland. She sadly wasn't able to make it, but works very closely with Colin. So Colin may be able to tell us a little bit about her role. But I'd like to start off actually with Chris, and to tell us a little bit about, I guess, what social enterprise is, because you've described it before as being a bit of a balance between business and then meeting community needs. Could you tell us a little bit more about that, please?
Yeah, and thank you so much for the invite today, and delighted to be sharing this stage with my colleagues who I know are experienced, and no doubt when I talk a little bit about social economy, social enterprise, they will have their own take. So I'm looking forward to the input from everyone else. But yeah, I mean, the social enterprise really is the legal structure for the organization, which essentially is a business. First, it sells products and services, but it reinvests all of its surpluses back in to some sort of social or environmental impact. Normally, it is independent of the public sector, and it would also have some form of asset lock, which would be secured for the community that it serves. So look, that seems like it's a little bit intangible. If I break it down, it is essentially an organization that sells a product or a service. Let's say cupcakes. I don't know, cupcakes are delicious. I like talking about them. They sell them for a profit. The more profit they have, the more impact they can have in the world. So they're generally able to put that money towards, let's say, homelessness. So the more, cupcakes you have, the more profit you have, the more impact you can have in the world. There's a couple of added pieces to that. Some people who are listening in would already be in the social economy sector. Maybe they're involved in some form of legal structure, like a CIC in the north, or a charitable entity, or a CLG. So there's many different types of social enterprises that we can have. But essentially, if you are setting up an organization for the community, that is a social enterprise. And we hope that if you can employ people who are socially excluded or marginalized as a work integrated social enterprise, there's an added benefit. So we find that social enterprises take on an awful lot of different forms. I mean, obviously, Adrian here, the call operates a number of them, and we certainly, through Andrew and myself and my colleague in Colin in the north, deal with a whole load of different types, which I'm happy to get into. I'm sure it always opens up a good, healthy debate.
Yeah, and as you said, I'm sure that everyone will have a slightly different way of looking at it, and we might come on back into that in a few moments. But I'm just going to come on to Andrew. Andrew, you're responsible for the National Social Enterprise Policy for Ireland, and I guess that takes that definition, and what you're trying to do as part of that policy is to raise awareness around social enterprise and to make more people, well, aware of it. Could you tell us a little bit more about that policy and how you've been trying to achieve that aim?
Yeah, absolutely. And again, Alex, thanks a million for the invitation, and great to be on the call with colleagues. And pity Amy isn't with us, but next time. Um, yeah, our policy was published in 2019, but it was probably published 120 years too late. Because actually, our first legal form for social enterprise in Ireland was back in the 1890s with the Industrial Provident Societies Act. I mean, we have a very long, rich history of cooperative, of community, of social economy in Ireland that antedates our policy by so far. I think that the policy, though, was a response to a growing appetite across society to recognize the importance of this type of business. I mean, we're talking about social enterprise. Chris defined it perfectly, but I mean, I'd make it even more simple. We're talking about business for social good. We're talking about businesses that can transform the society that they operate in and the environment that they want to cultivate. And our policy really was designed to try to increase awareness, demystify, in a sense, this sector, this vibrant, thriving sector. Give it an identity of its own, because it's important to distinguish that even though they're businesses, there are very specific characteristics around them. They're not driven principally by profit. They're driven, at least in tandem, profit and impact. Maybe even more so on the impact. And that's a whole question that we could debate, I'm sure, here today. So awareness has been really important, Alex, to just try to crack that nut and help society understand that, look, this is nothing new, but there's a huge opportunity here. If we can invest as much in social enterprise as we do in private business, we get a net benefit for society. And that's really what we're trying to achieve.
Yeah, super. And Colin, just coming on to you, that kind of awareness, could you give an indication of to what degree that exists in Northern Ireland?
Yes, Alex, and again, just thank you very much for the invitation to be here today. It has been around for a long time, but there's no doubt that the word awareness is something that sits at the heart of what we're trying to do in the North. People, even within the social enterprise sector, I believe, don't realise that they're a social enterprise. They're creating and generating income. Chris's definition, spot on. I think one of the things that we've got to really focus on is the fact that they are organisations that trade to make profit. Profit's not a dirty word. We should be proud to make profit. In fact, we need to make profit to fulfil our social mission. So the awareness of that sector, part of our role is to make private sector more aware of what a social enterprise is, make private sector more aware of how they can include social enterprises within their supply chains. That's very important, that we can get social enterprise into supply chains of the private sector. But there's also a role to play to making the public sector aware, politicians who are making policy aware, trying to drive policy to support social enterprise. And one of the markets, if you like, that we think there's huge potential in is young people. And hence why in 2019, Social Enterprise Northern Ireland appointed Amy as our youth ambassador, who's actually come through the Young Enterprise Programme, set up her own company, has recently been nominated and named as a top 30 under 30 in Northern Ireland from the business sector. And that's important that we link with the business sector to show businesses that we are businesses and we work alongside them. The only difference really is what we do with our profit. So the young people is a huge opportunity for us. If we can get young people interested, if we can get young people considering that the social enterprise is a career of choice, I think it'll go a long way to helping the awareness. But the other piece on the awareness that we need to make is that public, the actual people on the street who are going out and purchasing, buying their goods and services. There's so many opportunities out there to support social enterprises. And it's down to us and the rest of the sector to let them know the benefits of purchasing from certain organisations, and that those profits go back and are reinvested back into their social mission to help those that are worse off in society.
Yeah, yeah, and I guess that's something that's been changing over time. And Andrew, you mentioned a moment ago that the policy you work on is something that should have been in existence. I think you said 120 years ago. Adrian, not quite 120 years, but about 20 years, I think the Resurgam Trust has been operating in Lisburn, and it's the priorities that you've had and the challenges that you've faced over those 20 years. I wondered, because you started at a time when Northern Ireland was really in transition, and you set up the organisation to have a certain impact. And I wondered how those impacts have changed, how those challenges have changed over the years that you've been running the organisation.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Alex. I'm delighted to be here. Yeah, the Resurgam Community Development Trust was only formed in 2011, so it's only 10 years old. But we had, a history prior to that of 20 years working within the community. And when we first got involved in business, it wasn't even called social enterprise. It was basically community business. And the main motivation for us in the very, very early days, um, working within a community that was emerging from conflict in Northern Ireland, was the creation of employment. With a very simple concept in those early days, in and around the time of the Good Friday Agreement, if you were able to create meaningful employment for people from your own community, there was less likelihood of them getting involved with criminality, getting involved with paramilitaries, and it was always going to improve the health outcomes for them and their family members. So that was the very, very simple concept at the start. And we got involved in a number of businesses. As the years moved on, priorities, challenges changed. Northern Ireland changed, and we had already got the hook of the creation of employment. But if I fast forward till now, and the Resurgam Trust, operating 6 social enterprises and a credit union, have created sustainable employment for about 137 people. That's reliant on no government money, no funding. Um, and when I look at, the early days of why we done this, I suppose the creation of employment is still the main motivator for us getting involved in business. Yes, profit comes after that, but it is still about the creation of employment. And it is still about, the very simple fact that if you supply somebody or give somebody meaningful employment, it's going to have a huge impact on them and their families' lives, especially in relation to health. So yeah, the Resurgam Trust, very, very diverse community-based organisation. 6 social enterprises, all very, very different. Everything from a taxi company till a pub, till an enterprise centre, and Lisburn Community Self Build, which was one of our first and most successful community businesses. But the businesses wouldn't mean anything if we didn't have our social community based programs. It's all linked. And for us, that is the social impact that there is. Resurgam Youth Initiative, working with 700 young people every week. Resurgam Healthy Living Centre, doing health interventions right across Lisburn and wider afield. Early Intervention Lisburn, a local locality planning group, working in all the schools, all of the primary schools, all of the secondary schools. And none of that, none of the businesses would mean anything if we didn't have those social programs that are being delivered throughout the community. If it was just about businesses, we wouldn't be working in the social economy. We would just be business people running and managing profitable businesses.
Yeah, yeah. I was wondering, you've sort of highlighted there the importance of social enterprise being rooted in community, and I kind of want to open things up a bit of a discussion for anyone else to kind of come in on that. I might go back to Chris and ask you about kind of what the importance is of having social enterprise really rooted, in the grassroots of the community.
I think it's fundamental. I think when we're trying to talk a little bit about social enterprise and social economy organizations, finance and funding comes into it, and profit, and that's important. And I think measured social or environmental impact is not just good enough just to say, we're a corner shop, we employ people. If we didn't exist, therefore they wouldn't have a job, therefore we're having social impact. It's far more nuanced than that. It's about how do you actually affect people. It's not just about outputs, it's about outcomes. As a result of your social enterprise, how have people's lives changed? But the core of that actually is ownership. And really, if the community doesn't feel like they own it, you're probably on a losing streak. You just mentioned here a number of things, and I think Adrian spoke about the credit union movement as a great example of how everybody listening in can think on everybody who's a member of a credit union, which I think in Ireland, across the island of Ireland, is one of the highest per capita rates in the world. They own part of that financial institution, and that has served them well. It is their finance, and it is, regardless of how much they spend, how old they are, they have just as much say as the person next to them in the other bank account. And I think the ownership of the social enterprise leads to a better outcome for the communities that they serve, because there is buy-in. I know that Andrew could speak at length about this through the Department of Rural Community Development and their influence that social economy has had on the rural policy, and just how much communities rely on services like their local, for example, GAA club or other organizations that are rooted in those communities, that are served on boards voluntarily by the people that are there, not for private profit, but because they see the benefit for wider society. And if you can extend that out just to the social enterprises, and I know Adrian has spoken so eloquently there about the 20 years of success in Resurgam, it comes in many different shapes and forms. So, for example, it could be that it's a credit union model, or it could be that it's a community centre that is set up that then supports other businesses, or it could be much like the taxi service, or some examples that we have in Ireland, like PACE Social Enterprise. It works with people who are ex-offenders. They've been involved in justice and probation, and they set up a social enterprise called Mugshots. So they had this coffee cart idea. They trained them up to be baristas, but they also had a steel and metalwork and woodwork shop, and they made these carts that they then allow those people that were just out of probation and justice to then employ themselves. They made the carts, they got employed, and now they're sole traders. And that ownership on an individual scale wouldn't have happened if it hadn't have been for that social enterprise to be able to provide that autonomy. So ownership comes in many different forms, but it underpins many of the things that I think, particularly, maybe Andrew could speak a little bit more about rural Ireland, but it's definitely a critical nature of social enterprise.
Andrew, would you?
Alex, will I come in there?
Absolutely.
Yeah. Look, absolutely. I think that Chris is right to point to community being at the heart of social enterprise. And the research is very clear, by the way, that social enterprises that are rooted in communities tend to be more sustainable than their private sector alternatives. That's a matter of fact, and that's because communities have, a vested interest in a very positive way. To ensure that a social enterprise, thrives. Now, I say all that, and I don't want to mislead anyone who's listening to the call, as if to say the last 2 years haven't happened. They've been disastrous. The COVID experience has been disastrous for social enterprises. Incredibly, incredibly difficult. But in the normal course of events, the sustainability factor is there. So it just shows you how important community buy-in is. But on the other hand, when I just raised the issue of COVID, it's probably important to also say that when our economies closed down effectively, and were forced to, and rightly so, what economy survived? It was the social economy. It was the social economy that thrived. That was the emergency service effectively. And Chris rightly points to rural Ireland. I mean, what we saw from our department, and it's no accident, by the way, that social enterprise is part of the portfolio of the community department within government. We saw that the social economy stepped up to the mark in rural areas, Meals on Wheels services, all kinds of rapid innovations and adaptations of service provision. And they were incredibly successful because they were close to people. They understood the needs of people. They had a relationship already built up. They were able to draw down on that immense social capital that you have in rural areas. But on the other hand, there's also another aspect to this. I mean, frankly, there is a huge economic potential here for social enterprise to contribute to the national economy. One of the challenges we have from the perspective of rural development is the whole idea of a balanced economy. A balanced economy where you don't have 1 million people in Dublin and the rest scattered around the country, where you actually have a balance of the population, where people can live freely in different parts of the country and have access to an equitable level of service, and so on and so forth. Social enterprise has untapped potential, I think, in a lot of rural areas. Yes, we have a lot of community-based businesses. In fact, you look at even things like group water schemes in Ireland. They trade as social enterprises, effectively. Micro energy generation plants trade as social enterprises. So it's not your typical sort of childcare and other type of how would you say, sectors of business. So there's a huge potential to create jobs, to generate ancillary services, to bring and retain people in rural areas, and to really sort of invert, or not invert, but at least to equalize this issue that we have, where we have a disparity in terms of income inequality for people living in particularly peripheral rural areas. So there's a huge opportunity there, I think, as well, you know.
Yeah, can I just say from the perspective of Northern Ireland too, you talk about COVID, and there's no doubt COVID has been, terrible for this past couple of years. And who would have thought in March 2020 would have been only coming out of it again 2 years later. But whenever it did hit, I have to say that the private sector closed down more or less straight away and went back into furlough in Northern Ireland. It was the social economy, to back up what Andrew has said in our eye, that in the north decided, hold on a minute, we are local, we're on the ground, how can we help those? And we have a great example on the call today with Eddie, and no doubt he'll be able to tell you how his organisation stepped up to the mark. But social enterprises looked at what they were doing and thought, because they're social enterprises, they're able to pivot and change direction in what they're doing. So rather than doing something that was on one day was the way to operate, there was a need in a different direction. So they're able to turn and go in that direction because they're nimble and they can pivot. The whole idea of the impact on local communities, there's so many different examples. And the fact that the social enterprise will employ, we have some statistics that say 50-60% of those that are employed within social enterprises are from the local communities. And when you look at the impact that has, we talk about the impact on that individual themselves, who up to that point would never have thought they'd have had a job. That is a knock-on effect, talking to their families. And I've been at events where parents and siblings have spoken about the impact of their son, daughter, or sibling having a job within a social enterprise. They wouldn't have got a job in private sector, but social enterprises employed them, given them a job, and that's made a huge impact, not only on the individual, but on their families. But the other impact that has, and it shouldn't be underestimated by government departments, is the impact it has on the public purse. Not only are these people being employed, which means that they're not going to education establishments on a daily basis, they're actually getting a job which pays income tax and pays national insurance. So they're feeding back into the public purse, and there are great stats to show that as well. But the fact that they're local, they're nimble, they help those that need it the most. And there are so many that are doing this that don't realize that they're social enterprises. It's that sort of cornering somebody into a term, you're a social enterprise. It's not. It's really, we've got to focus more on what they're doing with their profit and the real impact they're having on society. And I do believe that there's a greater interest coming out of the private sector in taking social enterprises onto supply chains because they see the benefit that social enterprises are having locally. So that's one of the challenges we have, certainly in Northern Ireland, is just to get more and more private sector involved. But if you're talking about impact and adapting, and I think Eddie's well able to talk about what they did down in Lisburn during whenever COVID struck.
Mm-hmm. Adrian, would you like to lead on from there?
Yeah. COVID, as Colin said, it had a huge impact on all of us. Who could have ever have dreamt that could have even happened. It's a bit like the Ukrainian war now at the minute. Who could have predicted that we could be in this position we're in again? Um, but yeah, the social economy, the social businesses, right across the country, and certainly in Lisburn, under us, stepped up to the mark. Immediately, right away. Government was in disarray. They didn't know how to deal with this new thing that had happened, and immediately Resurgam Trust, put £10,000 of our own money into responses right away, and then raised another £10,000 within 2 weeks, turned Laganview Enterprise Centre into an emergency aid distribution centre. So this was moving much quicker than at that point some of the government or local authorities, they needed time to get their processes in place to get the supports out. So it gave that wee bit of lead-in time right away. Um, the bar was closed, the Highway Inn, Lisburn Community Inn's closed, but right away, the two managers come in and opened up a soup kitchen. They ended up cooking over 28,000 meals, which was delivered, to the most vulnerable throughout Lisburn over an 18-month period by community safety volunteers. None of those referrals actually, by the way, came in directly from us. They were coming in from social services, local authority. It was people that had identified, the people throughout the community that was most in need. The taxis, we went from having 55 cars in Premier Taxi Company down to 9. And it was just almost destroyed the business. But it's resilient. Those 9 were very busy during this whole period, delivering medicines, doing all of the things that needed to be done. And I think what was demonstrated was and the local council, our local politicians have acknowledged this. When everything else closed down, the community, our social economies, might have been ceased trading, but they didn't stop working. They stepped up to the mark and put their own money into it, and put their own time and resources into it. And that will stand by us, going forward. It was if there was anything good come out of COVID, it was a good public relations exercise, because the community actually seen who stepped up to the mark and who was able to deliver on behalf of our communities, and that'll stand by us, as we move forward. And certainly, I already see the relationship with our local authority, Lisburn and Castlereagh City Council, is much stronger because of COVID, because they acknowledge from elected members right through to the chief executive, the great contribution that the organisations on the ground actually made during this. So yes, out of something that was disastrous, there's probably quite a few positives that's come leading us into the future.
Yeah, and I suppose
I think it was just from day one. Sorry, Alex. I just wanted to maybe emphasize here, like it was just the points when COVID hit. Social enterprises, I like to say, like they closed the front door and they opened the back door, but like they were the ones that were resilient. They were the ones that up their game, and so many of them, I think, are seen now as being pillars of the community where they were before. Now it's really entrenched, and I think that's a good go-to person as your social enterprise, your social entrepreneur, the manager of that, or the Meals on Wheels and all those other things. There is a real good connection there, and I think that is important that we do kind of build on that. And I think that's part of the awareness that I think is now starting to have happen, particularly in the north. I know we've got an awareness strategy as part of the policy, and we're putting money towards that, but it's about highlighting all those good stories of great people who just, when the time came, stood up and they counted themselves and they were able to help others.
And I think, you've both just said there, but you've both talked about these incredible impacts that social enterprises have had, especially during COVID. And some of those are, they seem absolutely huge. And they seem like actions like, Adrian, you just mentioned about, converting the inn into a soup kitchen. But how, in building up these social enterprises and in having these enormous impacts, how do you actually, I guess, balance that with then keeping the books and, keeping the business side still afloat?
Well, it's very difficult. There's no use trying to, at the end of the day, you're running a business, you know what I mean? And it needs to be a profitable business, you know what I mean? gone are the days, we're well by the days where people think that a social enterprise is this wee fluffy thing that just does nice things, and it's working, not to make money. I think it's been highlighted a couple of times. Profit is important, so you need to build on that, and you need to make your profit. Part of the resilience was having enough reserves built up, to see through those really difficult dark times, and now just starting from the beginning to restructure and rebuild. I think the positive thing for our model in Lisburn, we have a number of small community-based social enterprises which are very diverse. So some of them were able to continue to trade, and do quite well during COVID, where others, found it extremely difficult. So I think that's one of the positives of the model that we have set up. If one particular element of our businesses fails, there's others to stack up and support. And what I would say is, a lot of people come to Lisburn and look at the Resurgam Trust model of community development, regeneration, social enterprise. And I always, when I present and always when I talk, I'm very clear to say, look, there's bigger and better and more profitable social enterprises throughout the country than what we have in Lisburn. There's bigger and better social programs, youth initiatives, etc., than what we have. I think what's slightly different for us is that very diverse range, that holistic view of having it all linked under that same umbrella. And the other thing that I'd say is that we never had a blueprint or a plan to do this. Everything that we have created came from another community. So we took our knowledge transfer from other communities. For example, the credit union. It came out of a good practice study visit over to Edinburgh and looked at what the credit union was able to do in relation to addressing drug addiction in working class communities in Edinburgh. We took that learning home and decided that we wanted to create a credit union. The Enterprise Centre came out of a good practice study visit up to the Rathmore Centre up in Craigan Enterprises. We took the learning from there. And I suppose we're now in the unique position because we have consolidated our businesses and we have loads of new ideas that we're working on. We're always looking at new ideas, and we have another 2 or 3 new ideas that we're actively pursuing now at the minute. But we're in the unique position where we've also created, through all of this work, an organisation that's called the Community Academy for Northern Ireland. And that is basically a partnership between the Resurgam Trust here in Lisburn and the Fermanagh Trust up in Enniskillen, where we now take our knowledge and transfer that into other communities. So we don't make ourselves out to be high-flying consultants. What we bring to the table is the 20 odd years from each of those respective organisations of that learning, the things that worked for us, the things that didn't work for us, and taking that knowledge and transferring that into other communities. We're currently working in the 5 urban villages in Northern Ireland, North, South, East and West Belfast, and up in Derry, Londonderry, and delivering programmes on behalf of the Executive Office. And it's just us putting something back into communities that we got out of communities, 20 odd years ago, because we got our learning from other people. It's as simple as that.
I think that's an important thing, Eddie, that there's no need to reinvent the wheel either in cases like this. There are great examples out there that if you're in one part of the country and you're thinking you've got an idea to set up a social enterprise or develop your community group and looking at income streams, there are examples out there of people that have done it. And I suppose the challenge is to introduce those people to others, and just to say, and that's where organisations like central organisations, representative bodies can help in introducing members to members, because I think together we are stronger, just to coin somebody's slogan from somewhere. But I think it's important that we do work together, and we do strive to learn from each other. I think that's very, very important.
I think that collaboration is something that it would be really nice to go into a bit more detail, I suppose, especially looking at it. I mean, you all are working in different areas of grassroots, policy, all these different areas that are impacting social enterprises. How can that kind of collaboration, and I open this up to anyone, how can that kind of collaboration exist on an all-island basis as well? Because you're all working in different areas geographically across the island.
Could I come in there for a second,
Yeah.
Alex? Just to kick it off, because I think that the collaboration is really a watchword for us in government when it comes to social enterprise. I mean, really, we're proud that the National Social Enterprise Policy was a co-created document, and it was, unashamedly a foundational policy. So it's not perfect by any means, but it's a very good start, we think. And now we're getting into the stage where we will be working together with Chris and loads of other colleagues that hopefully will be listening into this podcast, working with them to try to develop the successor, to make it even more clear, more ambitious, scaled in a way that scales impact as well as operations potentially. And all that is really important. It's really important that government works with communities in not a cursory way, but a meaningful, active, ongoing way. At the start, when you introduced Chris and I, you mentioned the National Social Enterprise Policy Implementation Group. Like, that is one of the groups we have that allows us to have that sort of open exchange, and we don't always agree. And we try to push things forward, because look, I don't want anyone listening to this call to think that we're suggesting the situation is perfect. Far from it. There's loads of things we need to do. And it does start, though, with government policy, in my opinion. You need to have clarity of purpose from the highest level, because there's no shortage of social capital. You listen to Adrian there, and you listen to other colleagues around the work that's happening on the ground. There's just no shortage. People just need to be given the elements to succeed. And that starts with government. But coming back to your point about collaboration on an all island basis, I mean, listen, when I think about the environmental, climatic, biodiversity, social, or any other challenges we face, it's a nonsense for us to think about borders. And I mean this in a completely apolitical way. I'm just saying, as a human society, if we're not collaborating and working together, we are failing. We're losing. We have a particular opportunity, I think, on this island to collaborate in a whole raft of different areas. And when it comes to social enterprise, what you see now is there are more and more organizations that are either operating both north and south, because there's such a natural sort of harmony, I think, of issues to be addressed, and so on and so forth. You're seeing more and more, I think, collaboration between organizations, just sharing experience. Myself and Colin and Chris and many others have met and have met in Belfast or in Dublin and shared experience and shared learnings. And it's very funny because, we look to each other and think, God, I wish we were where they are, in one way. And then they say the same about us in another way. And that strengthens us all, because look, there's such an amount of, I suppose, overlap and common ground between the two jurisdictions. I think there's a huge opportunity here. And in this regard, one last point I want to make is around the Peace Plus program and the huge opportunity that program in particular presents for further collaboration in the whole area of social enterprise. In fairness to the drafters of that program, both administrations and the communities, they really have seen the opportunity to weave in social impact into its DNA. So there's huge potential there, I think.
That's an interesting point you make, Andrew, about being envious of the stuff that each other's doing. One of the things that I'm extremely envious about is the fact that you do have a national social enterprise policy. It's something we've been championing for a while, and we will be over the next 12 months, because we believe that you talk about collaboration. I believe that departmental collaboration is important in Northern Ireland. There's so many, because social enterprise is so diverse. It ticks the education box, the justice box, the health box, just so many things. Without a strategy, I think we lag behind what you guys are doing in the Republic. I think if we had had a strategy into March 2020, we wouldn't have struggled for so long for the support that the sector so badly needed. Our colleagues in Scotland and Wales, I look very enviously across there as well, and that because they have a strategy, because they're recognised by their government departments and political parties, they were immediately considered for support whenever support was required, as it was for private sector in March 2020. And within a matter of days or weeks, we took 7 months of lobbying to try to get that. And I do believe that we need to bring in that policy, because what that does is increase the awareness with decision makers. We we're secretariat to the All Party Group in Northern Ireland, who have been so supportive, and all political parties do see the benefit. And we spoke to all the party officers pre the election coming up in May when they were looking at their manifestos. They're all very receptive and very positive towards what we're doing. But I think that just needs to be come together and gel together with an actual cross-departmental, cross-political party strategy that will take that forward. But the relationship that we have with the guys in the Republic is very strong. You know, as Andrew says, we've met several times. We know Chris very well, and that's a relationship that we, as representative bodies, that we need to develop, but also to introduce our members and the individual organisations to some of the work that's going across in the other jurisdictions. So there's a big role to play, but I think where we are as a sector, we're well capable and well able to do that.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Chris, you've definitely worked
so many other things as well. Yeah, I should probably disclose at this point that Colin was my boss for a while I was director of social enterprise in Northern Ireland, which I always never know what's going to come up next. Oh, geez, look. No, but I think that's really important. We are we are on the island of Ireland, and you know, our two, you know, Belfast and Dublin is 2 hours away. This isn't, you know, 200,000 miles away. This is just 2 hours up the road, and so it does make an inflection. And I think just back to the point there about what Andrew was saying, you know, when you're working, we don't see the border. I know I chair a social enterprise in Derry, and we work in Donegal quite a lot. And you know, for the purposes of tax and a few other things, there are some issues, but there's no checkpoints, there's no stops, there's no issues that would have potentially caused any, you know, sort of grief. For us, it's really important that we do have those connections and that we're building them out. There are things to learn from both North and South, and just while we're talking about, you know, maybe sort of UK policy and how it shapes in Northern Ireland, Wales, England, Scotland, and then the Republic of Ireland, but also then the Social Economy Action Plan that we have in Europe will very much dictate how Europe will see social economy going forward. And I know that we're hopefully looking very much to see how that'll affect us. There's some incredible things there. And I know that we do have a policy, and we're very thankful for Andrew and the department and their constant engagement. But we do have stuff to learn from our partners in Northern Ireland, particularly around the area of procurement. I know it is probably the most boring word in the English language. Apologies if you've made it this far in the podcast and you're going, gee, good Lord, how are we getting out of procurement? But this is transformative. I mean, how it is that we purchase these things, how it is, Colin spoke it earlier, but like Adrian speaks it every day, how do you get in the supply chains of these organizations? How do you encourage private enterprise? How do you get better bang for your buck, for your public monies? These are things that we're learning from the UK just as much as we are from our European partners. And the situation of collaboration is definitely not a one-way street. We have constantly learned from our colleagues, both in Northern Ireland and all across the continent as well. And so that's not going to stop anytime soon. And just to double down on this, you know, we've already worked hard in Ireland to get some clauses to encourage social enterprises to earn public monies or private monies and get in the supply chains. This is the shift. This is the future. You know, Andrew spoke about it. You know, business as a force for good, social enterprise is definitely employing people who are socially excluded or marginalised, wouldn't necessarily have a job normally. They're working in communities to make them stronger. If we can better use our public spend and our private spend to encourage more social enterprises to either offer opportunities for people that wouldn't have them or otherwise, or to provide new products and services that they wouldn't even have thought of, but in far more of a social or environmentally mind. I think we're doing well as a society. This isn't just benefiting the social economy. This is definitely benefiting all of us. And so, yeah, I would see that our collaboration future is going to be in several different areas. And whatever has happened before has been great. The future will certainly push us forward an awful lot more. We don't have a choice. You know, the world is burning. We have an obligation to our future children and grandchildren to live in a better world. And I think having a more social economy minded enterprise or public sector is going to be the future. So, you know, it's moving that way already.
It's interesting. You've both yourself and Colin have mentioned in a way this kind of envy that exists in some of the things that might some social enterprises have, or that social enterprises in Northern Ireland may have that those in the Republic don't, and vice versa. And there is one particular asset that you have, Adrian, within the Resurgam Trust, because you mentioned earlier knowledge transfer and the transfer of knowledge between, whether it be different jurisdictions on the island or also with the United Kingdom, and you have also, as well as knowledge transfer, you've benefited quite a lot from asset transfer and community asset transfer. And this is something that I understand you have more access to perhaps in the north. I wondered if you could talk more about what that is, and perhaps, Chris, if you want to bring in then the kind of challenges that are faced with having access to those kind of benefits in the Republic of Ireland.
Yeah. One of the big frustrations is that our own local government doesn't appear to learn from successes. So when something clearly works, why is it not built upon, repeated? Instead of actually saying, "Oh, that worked really well," and then they just walk away from it. So what I mean by that is, the success of the Resurgam Trust came down to two or three different things. One was a bit of luck, just being in the right place at the right time. One was borrowing money, and not being totally reliant on grant funding, but actually going to banks, should it be community banks or commercial banks, and borrowing money to put into buildings, to build buildings. And the other thing was, a way back in 2001, 2 and 3, having land transferred to us at zero cost. So that was land transfer, community asset transfer working before we had our community asset transfer policy, which simply doesn't work. On the mainland, there's legislation around the transfer of land and buildings to community third sector organisations. Here we have a policy that doesn't work. And there's two things that'll highlight that worked for us. A bit of wasteland that was dumping land in an area of Lisburn that was of no value to anybody, certainly not the housing executive, because it was a nuisance area. It was transferred to us. We levered in borrowed money and brought in a training scheme we built 9 houses, and it was a joint venture with a building construction company. We trained around 50 young people on NVQs and construction skills. And at the end of that building period, which took about 3.5 years, we were left with, we had sold houses to first-time buyers, and we were left with 3 houses. We had no cash in the bank, but all loans were paid, and the 3 houses were immediately at that point valued at £220,000 each. That put us in a brilliant position, because then we had security. We could go to the bank, we could put the houses up to borrow money, and that enabled us to invest in the creation of that social enterprise network, which we now have. That's very successful. We also had another land transfer right in the centre of the Old Warren Estate, 2 high-rise flats that, again, the Old Warren Estate in those days was described as the second most unpopular social housing community in Northern Ireland. Nobody wanted to live in it. It was derelict. It was fallen down. It was controlled by paramilitaries. Nobody wanted to be in it. And the housing executive again transferred those 2 flats to us. That enabled us to lever in a cocktail of funding. There was 4 different funders involved. We had the flats knocked down, and we built the Lagan View Enterprise Centre. It changed the whole perception of the area. At the same time, a lot of regeneration coming in. Some were knocked down, new housing built, houses upgraded. Now, today, in 2022, it's one of the most popular, sought after social housing communities in Northern Ireland. Huge numbers of people queuing up to move into Old Warren, low levels of crime, antisocial behaviour. Those land transfers worked. They clearly worked. It's what brought the wealth to Resurgam and gave us the opportunities. And we actually wrote it down. Alex, as you know, we have a small booklet conflict of peace. We wrote down very detailed account of how we done this. Um, well received in all government circles, but now you simply, there isn't the opportunities to have even wasteland transferred over, and it's a real shame because it worked for us. And really, what it, I've talked a lot about the social enterprise model that we have in the businesses and the creation of employment. We've also built up a small portfolio of residential properties and commercial properties, which generates an income into the Resurgam Trust. I mean, we have 11 residential houses, affordable houses for rent. 5 of those are dedicated to homeless young people, supported accommodation for homeless youth. But on top of that, it generates an income for the Resurgam Trust, and then a number of community centres and business premises that we own and manage. So we're not a housing association, and we don't want to be a housing association. We're a community-based organisation that has a community-led housing model that supports the work of our charity and all of the social programs that we're involved in, and it works really well. So when you look at the end product, it beggars belief that somebody hasn't picked it up and says, well, we could do elements of that for other communities. It's not about us. It's about how you transfer that into other communities. And that's one of the big things that we're keen to do. Share our journey, share everything about it, the good bits that worked and the many, many bad bits that didn't work, because the things that failed are as important to other communities, as the things that are successful. And we're in that unique position now where we can do that and transfer that knowledge out. And what I will say before I finish is, I think Peace Plus does bring opportunities right across the whole of Ireland. It is a great opportunity. And this is another thing that isn't really talked about within the whole social economy sector, but it is that good relations and peace building initiatives that goes right across that sector. Religion, cultural backgrounds don't come into it. It is one of the best advocates for peace building that I certainly know. It goes right across, all communities and all sectors. And I think the social economy has a huge contribution to make in relation to peace building and consolidating peace in Ireland. We can't be complacent. It needs continued work at, and I think the social economy sector allows us to do that.
Chris, we're coming to our last few minutes. Would you like to pick up on that?
Yeah, good Lord. I mean, there's so many things there. And you asked just earlier about collaboration. How do we learn from each other? Here's a perfect example of an organisation as a community that got together to establish what the needs were in the local community, and then did something about it and fought for it. And I know Adrian would probably say it was a walk in the park, Adrian, right? It was so easy. No, it's difficult. And here's the thing. Why is it difficult? I mean, there's one aspect that I think, Andrew and I certainly have talked about in the past, and I no doubt we'll be talking about it with the upcoming strategy, which is coming in for the National Social Enterprise Policy. But it's really about making the default, the right thing. The social economy should be the default. Community asset transfer, where we give first dibs to the community to raise the capital and give them 6 months to buy the local pub over before it goes into local property development or whatever it is that's in the hands of developers that have loads of money, which is probably funded by the bank, which is probably funded by the taxpayer in the end up anyway. We should be defaulting to the social economy. How often do we need to know to be reminded about the social economy has benefits for everybody? It brings a certain level of equity and equality to the areas that they are involved in. And if that's, addressing the housing situation, which I know we're constantly dealing with here in the South, we've got a serious challenge here. We need to be able to tackle it, affordable housing. But also, if it's just community asset transfer, it is like that, pub that's gone out of business in the local area but could be bought by the locals who all have some sort of contribution, have social finance back it up, and then keep it as a hub for the community as it always was before. Those sort of things are important, and we make it difficult in Ireland. We don't make it difficult on purpose, but the default is to turn it private. The default is for it to be a profit-making enterprise that just solely relies on one shareholder, and then everyone else can, stick it. we have an opportunity here in Ireland in the social economy. We can do better. And that is about offering the opportunity of social enterprise first. I think one of the things that I think we have coming up with our local strategy, and certainly something that I know we've debated, is that when somebody knocks on the door of their local enterprise office, they want to set up a business, that they are taught how to be a social enterprise first. They learn everything about sales and finance. They talk everything about HR and knowing your market and everything else. And in addition to that, they're also taught about the social and the environmental impact. And that's what they're taught. And if they fall short, then they're just a normal enterprise. They can be added to the number of enterprises that are normally there. But if they achieve the moral goals of a social enterprise or an environmental enterprise, then I think as a society we're winning. And that equates to learning from our partners, collaborating across the board. That equates to community asset transfers, allowing for these things to make it the default. And I'm glad to say, we are starting to go that way. But Andrew's talking about this as well. There's more to do. We're not doing enough. There is more that we can do. And I think there's the opportunity to learn from best practice. And by the way, we have incredible best practices ourselves in Ireland, whether it's housing or whether it's from our cooperative movement over the years that have been able to lead the charge. There's opportunities that we definitely can lead on and learn from across the board. But I think maybe, Andrew, I don't mean to put it back on you, but I think these conversations are ongoing, and that's the healthy debate that we're having. And we all recognize that we need to, but it's how, and that's part of a conversation. That's co-production, and I think that's one of the areas that I think we're getting right. We're not there, but we're on the journey.
Mm-hmm. Andrew, we're coming into the last couple of minutes here, and I wondered, you mentioned at the very start that journey, and you talked about what a long-term journey it has been. And I guess now, during the course of the conversation, we've talked about how rapidly that journey has come on more in recent years. I wondered if you would just sum up for us that journey and where you see it going now.
Well, I think it's to pinch a phrase that Chris used earlier. I think now is the moment for social enterprise, quite frankly, because people are choosing, social, ethical businesses. They care about how their goods and services are brought about. They care about how staff are treated. People are more conscious about these things. That's just a matter of fact. So the question is, do we respond to that changing nature of society, or do we sort of blindly go on and sort of pretend there's only one type of business we should be supporting? I completely agree with Chris about this issue of the access to the business supports and the sort of default on social enterprise. We need to be ensuring that social enterprises have access to the same sorts of supports and more, not only the same, but and more than mainstream businesses. There's massive untapped potential here, and the moment is right for several reasons, not least because we have this twin track of transitions that we have to make. The climate and biodiversity crises are huge. So all aspects of our lives will be changing, but therein lies a huge opportunity for social enterprise, particularly in circular economy type organizations, in energy generation. There's massive opportunities, but we can't be narrow-minded. We have to be ambitious and we have to work together. But I do think that spelling out those clear challenges that we have a challenge of awareness in public policy, let's be honest, at all levels. We have a challenge of awareness in the political circles, we do. But we are, by practice, demonstrating how successful social enterprises can be. And with those good examples, we can convince people to, I think, turn a corner in their own understanding, provide more, do more. I just think that there's a real opportunity here, but we have to absolutely be working together to have, the most positive outcome.
Mm-hmm. And I think you've really summed up there the kind of the breadth of impact that the social economy can have, not just in communities that are facing so many different challenges and changing challenges and challenges that differ by location, but are also shared often between different communities, different jurisdictions. And I think it's a really nice place to kind of wrap up the conversation. We've looked at the importance of social economy being rooted in community. We've looked at the role of young people within it, specifically Colin, the youth ambassador, Amy Clint. We've looked at the changing challenges that have existed through time, and how COVID has highlighted the need for the social economy and the kind of urgent challenges that we face now and how they can be addressed through it. And we've also looked, towards the end there and really throughout at those opportunities for addressing shared challenges through collaboration, whether it be between different communities, different organisations, different jurisdictions. So thank you very much. It's been a highly interesting conversation. Thank you very much for joining us, Andrew, Chris, Colin and Adrian.
Thanks, pleasure.
You have been listening to Across Divides. Learn more about today's topic and find opportunities to get involved at iCommunityHub.org. iCommunity is a joint initiative of the Wheel and NICFA and is supported by the Northern Ireland Department for Communities, the Department of Foreign Affairs Reconciliation Fund and the Shared Island Unit in the Department of the Taoiseach. You have been listening to Across Divides. Learn more about today's topic and find opportunities to get involved at iCommunityHub.org. iCommunity is a joint initiative of the Wheel and NICFA and is supported by the Northern Ireland Department for Communities, the Department of Foreign Affairs Reconciliation Fund and the Shared Island Unit in the Department of the Taoiseach.